What is up, everybody? Mark on the mic. We got him, Mr. Paul Neess, live and in person.
I'm here again.
It's always a pleasure, Paul.
It's a pleasure to be here, Mark. I enjoy it.
Before we threw the old headsets on, Paul, you were talking a little bit about a mule deer hunt that you have coming up. Sounds pretty cool. It's getting me fired up. One thing that you're going to use in high likelihood is a spotting scope.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the situations that these guys are critical for. You know, this is a tag it takes years to draw, trying to kill a big buck. So you really want that ability to have extra magnification to be sure what you're going after is good enough.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The topic, if you haven't gathered yet today, is about spotting scopes, and it's really kind of backing up and saying, like, how to choose a spotting scope. We've got different configurations. We have angled straight. We have different sizes, magnifications, tiers of quality built in there as well. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot that goes into that decision, and part of that decision, Paul, is like, when does a person, would you say it's like, yeah, I'm going to need a spotter?
You know, that's a good question. Not every hunt would need a spotter. It depends a little bit if you're focused on killing, an animal that's maybe got a certain size of antler or rack that you want to get, where you're really going to be critical about what you shoot. Sheep hunting is another great example. For example, if you hunt sheep, you almost always have some sort of a minimum horn length or curl. You've really got to evaluate that very closely before you can shoot. And there's other types of hunting. I think back to a lot of elk hunts I've done. Many times elk are not terribly difficult to see if you're not hung up on evaluating, maybe getting a certain size of antler or rack. You might be able to get away without a spotting scope. It really depends. It's awfully nice to have, though. Anytime you're looking at very long distances, I can think of many times you can use a bino. A lot of times you can see animals at very far distances, but you really might not know what they are, or whether they're even a buck or a doe. If they're a certain size rack, you may have no idea without the extra power. The binos typically these days, 15, 18 power. That's about the high end for a bino. The spotters, usually that's roughly about where they take off, and then they go all the way on up to maybe 60 power or so. So big jump in magnification.
Big jump in magnification. Yeah. As far as like an order of operations, one thing that I feel, yes, a spotting scope, I'd say particularly on any open landscape Western hunt, is going to be or can be a huge asset. One thing that I feel like I see, though, is for folks that are maybe going out west their first time, they place maybe more of a precedence on the spotter than a binocular. Not all the time, but sometimes. And I guess as far as an order of operations, my suggestion, I'd be curious to get your take on this, Paul. Is
well, I bet it's the same as yours.
Start with a good binocular.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no question. I think that the situation where the spotter would take precedence over the bino, pretty few and far between. You're going to use that bino probably 9 times to 10 or 10 to 1 over what you'll use a spotter, if not more than that. The bino is the everyday tool. You're going to use it all day long. Most times you use a bino to find something that you then use a spotting scope to identify. So yeah, no question. I think the money should be spent on a decent binocular first, and then move to the spotting scope. You
really dovetailed into what I was going to follow that with, though. The good news is you need both. In my opinion, you do need both. Angled versus straight, Paul. I feel like that's the question that comes up maybe the most.
Yeah, it's a common one to get. I talk to many guys on the phone, many hunters, and that's a very frequent question to get. For a tall guy like me, it's a no-brainer. It's a really easy decision, and I completely favor the angled scopes for a number of reasons. Anytime you can reduce that height of a spotter on a tripod, which of course you do by using an angled eyepiece, the stability increases. It's less prone to wind shift, movement, vibration. If you can avoid having the center column run up on a tripod, that's a huge plus. And unfortunately, a lot of guys, especially if you run a straight scope, you have to run that center column up on your tripod. And as soon as you run the center column up, you've given up a bunch of that stability. Instead of that 3-pronged legs, now you've got that single pole coming up, and it shakes and wiggles a lot more. So a lot of times an angled spotter, you can completely drop that down. So big plus there. I find with use they're definitely more comfortable. Really, over hours of time looking through them, I think you'll get more neck strain, back strain with a straight one over an angled one. They have their disadvantages too, though, as I know you know too, that if you're trying to track something and it's moving or running, a lot of times it's when you're getting your gear out, you're setting a spotter up, you're trying to find that thing. It's slower on an angled eyepiece. It's just not the same intuitive look as if you're looking straight through like a rifle scope.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the one drawback to them there. With time, though, guys get really used to that. It's not tough. Enough time, you can get pretty good with pointing an angled one very quickly to where you want to go with it. Just time.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I feel like sometimes when a person is like, oh, I'm definitely falling to this camp and I could never do that camp, it is that time. And it is just what you're used to.
Right.
Boy, there's not necessarily a right answer, but I think I gravitate towards the angled as well. Just like, I mean, take if you and I were hunting together, Paul, which we need to do that. But you're quite a bit taller than I am, right? So you find something and you're like, hey, Mark, get over here, check this buck out. Now, if we have a straight, I'm either having to maybe I guess in the case of with you, I'll be on my tippy toes.
Yeah, for one of us, it doesn't work.
For one of us, it's not going to work. So you're going to be, getting low or high. Where just with the angled, odds are I can just dip my eye in and be like, okay, I see what you got going on.
It's easier, I would say, on an angled setup. That's a good point for a tall guy like myself. You can still comfortably use it at a slightly lower height, enough of a height where you could come up. You'd have no problem looking through and seeing it. So that's a good point, especially with your group of people or a couple guys hunting together. You want to look through it. Another thing I'll point out quick: a lot of guys these days, and I do it all the time too. I like to use my phone to take pictures of things with an adapter through these spotters. Whether sometimes it'll give you a little extra magnification, you could zoom in and really get a little more magnified look at what it is you're seeing. Other times you just want to take a picture of something, but it's a super valuable reason to have and to use with a spotting scope. And one thing guys don't realize is when you whether it's a camera or your phone that you're hooking up to the back side of these spotters, they sit better on an angled one because they're tipped up a little bit and the weight comes down. Where a straight one, they hang off the back. I've done that with my phone sometimes, and the adapters may not quite hold it well enough. It wants to come off or move. They sit better on angled eyepieces. So now there's another minor reason to go with the angled.
And again, going back to what we just talked about before about multiple people being able to look into it. And you not that you couldn't do it on a straight, depending on the height of the tripod, but it is again going to be easier for I want to be looking over at what you're videoing, or we can be talking through something as well. Like, so we're looking at the same thing at the same time. Like, okay, the buck's whatever. Let's say he's bedded this way, or he's standing up, or the sun's doing this, and whether you're just like recording just for the sake of posterity and you want the memory, or if you're trying to coordinate a plan of attack or judgment or talk through something, that's going to be a little bit easier. Now, I can't talk down about the straight. Like you said, there are advantages, and I'd say, probably last I heard, like from a sales numbers side of things, it's pretty even. Like what people choose.
Fairly closely,
like you said, the straight, it's more line of sight. It's like you point your finger, faster subject acquisition. I know on most of our spotters we have like a rotating collar, but still, if you're logging a lot of truck time, I still think a straight. If you're using a car window mount, I personally think it's a better option.
Yeah, no question. Off the car window mounts, the straights work better. And as you said, even though on an angled one you can rotate this guy and move it around. Inevitably, if you try to do that, the animal or the critter you're trying to look at, it's in a position that no matter how you turn and twist that, you can't comfortably get your head behind it. Whereas straight, pretty much every time, you have that on a typical car window mount, you have a lot of movement, you can always get a straight on something quickly. So huge plus. Yeah, if that's something a guy does a lot, glassing off of a vehicle or a truck window, then I would hedge my earlier say and think, you might want to consider a straight then for that.
What about, Paul, terrain, like real steep mountain type country, is there an advantage to one eyepiece design over the other?
It depends. If you're looking up, then an angled works great.
Right.
If you're on the crest of a ridge, though, and you're looking down, then an angled's kind of a pain in the butt, and a straight one actually works better. So that's just a matter of where you happen to be at any particular time. I've used these guys by doing what I just, you can spin that collar, you can kind of turn it sideways, but for like creeping over a ridge and looking down below you, a straight does work better for that too. Yeah.
Interesting.
But then if you're on the bottom and you're looking up on a mountain face, then the angles work really well for that. And I would guess, thinking back all the years and time that I've probably spent a whole lot more time looking up at a mountain face than creeped over looking down off the top.
Yeah, I'm generally at the bottom looking up, going, we're thinking about maybe going up there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I can see guys that maybe you hunt high country mule deer or sheep a lot, then you're up maybe on those ridges looking down. But I think more often guys are looking at a big face in front of them. You're looking at distance, and you're just trying to see what's on that face someplace. So
yeah. We've got a few different sizes here. So on the table, if you're watching on YouTube, we just brought the Razor HD series.
Top of the line.
That's our top of the line series. Jim would be mad at me for not representing the the other series of spotters. But I feel like for representation, it maintains some consistency here, and we're going to be able to tell kind of like everything we need.
Well, yeah,
to tell.
everything other than quality of glass, which is kind of a separate topic altogether. But the kind of the difference in sizes and weights, angled or straight, those all sort of hold true whether you're discussing the high end razors or the Vipers in the middle or the Diamondbacks. They all kind of those arguments are going to be the same there.
Yep. So in this series, and I feel like the rest of our spotting scopes roughly follow like the same form factor.
They do, yeah.
For zoom range, like within a couple power. But we have the new guy here. This
beautiful little spotters.
Just a long-awaited addition to the Razor HD spotting scope series. It was a holdout because we wanted to get it right. This is the 13 to 39 by 56.
Yes, indeed. And this is replacing the prior 50 millimeter razors,
right?
Which a little bit smaller objective lens, slightly smaller zoom range. I think it's a great upgrade on that scope, though. It's just it certainly follows the look and build quality of the existing razors. It's still very trim and light. It's only a couple ounces heavier than the prior 50s.
Yeah, I think it's coming in at, I want to say, like, depending on, there is a little bit of a weight variance between the angled and the straight, but it's kind of like that 28 and change to 29, something like that.
I think about 3 ounces heavier than the earliers. But when you figure, you look what you're getting, you have a larger objective lens. You went from a 50 to a 56. You've also increased the upper end of the scope correspondingly with the bigger objective lens. So now you're getting a little more magnification on the high end. I think it's a more rugged design. I think it's built a little bit better.
Form factor-wise, it's sleeker.
Is great. The helical focuses are very sleek and tough. You don't have a projecting focus knob anymore that can be prone to damage if they're bumped or dropped. So it's a wonderful little spotter.
This is a spotting scope. Or the 13 to 39, and even its predecessor, the 11 to 33 by 50. I feel, and I've said it a million times, but I think oftentimes people look, or when they're thinking about a spotting scope, they think I need the Hubble telescope, and they don't realize what a tool like this is capable of. Is it going to do everything that the 85 is? No, it's not. They are. There's a reason why we have different models, but it is incredibly capable.
It is, yeah. It's a matter of just picking the right tool for the job. This is a great spotter for the guy that's going to backpack hunt, who's going to climb, who's going to do a lot of physical activity, watching how much weight you're carrying. Sure, you're not going to get the magnification and light gathering out of a big scope, but it's much more portable. It's something that realistically you could carry, or on a tough backpack hunt, that spotter might just be too big. I mean, it just, you're carrying tent, food, all the other gear with you. Something's got to give somewhere. And sometimes it's a matter of picking what you feel is the right tool for it. Yeah.
I've got a bear hunt coming up here, which, bears aren't really, in general, at least, I guess I'm also not like I don't really care about getting a big one all that much. Also, where I'm going isn't necessarily renowned for a big one. I'm hunting the place more than anything. But when I did that hunt previously, I brought a set of 12 UHDs and a tripod, and that's all. I didn't bring a spotter on this trip, and this is a backcountry alpine backpack thing. I am going to bring that 56 now. And it's not, it's because I'm like, the space and weight, I'm like, yeah, I'll take that. I'll still take that. I feel like really like using it. But it kind of goes back to that difference of, it only does you good if you bring it. And that's what I'll bring.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you might well find yourself in a situation where you've seen a bear at great distance with the 12s, but you really don't have any way to really get any feel for the size of that
and
bear.
They can be tricky.
Bears can be very difficult. Yeah, and so it might be that's something you'll be glad you have.
Yeah.
And the idea, of course, with a spotter is if you look at an animal a long ways off, you can't really make a call with your binocular, but you put the spotter on it, and you can decide maybe at that point whether you want to invest, the next day or two into going after that particular animal. Maybe it's going to take you hours. Maybe it's going to take you a day or two to get there. The spotter might just save you that. If you look and you get the spotter up and it's like, it really looks like a young bear or a sow, or maybe you see a cub that you didn't see with the binoculars. So it could save you a lot of time and trouble.
That's, it's funny. Like I was just getting ready to contradict myself a little bit. Like I've definitely gotten away with predominantly using binoculars, but in this type of environment too, like you said, you might glass up a bear real far away and you're like, yeah, I can tell it's a bear. But like you said, like, oh, is that it? Is that a young bear? Is it a sow?
Yeah.
Or, like you said, spotting a cub that's in the bushes. They're smaller, harder to see, right?
No, so you might easily miss that at great distance with a bino, sure.
You might save yourself a lot of walking and, the good part of a day that could have been spent hunting, looking for a bear that you were going to shoot.
Yeah.
So,
and for me, similar situation on the deer hunt we were talking about. This is a high country hunt. It's really one that I killed lots of mule deer. I'm really, this hunt, it's a great experience. It's beautiful country. But I'm really not going to kill a buck unless it's really a big old trophy class buck. And that's a situation where the spotter really comes in. I really do want it before I invest probably a great deal of time and effort into going after one, to be sure that it truly is of a certain size and age class, and there the spotter is just a must. And that that hunt is it's a classic backpack type hunt. So there the new 56 is right on the money. It's the one I'll be using.
You think that's the one you're going to go with?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
I do like the 65 millimeter.
That's where it gets tough. You've got the one in the middle, and then you're trying to.
This is the one that this is kind of the Goldilocks to me.
Yeah.
That mid-size 65. Like to me, that's like the do-all.
Of course, you and I sit in a wonderful spot as compared to many of our listeners out there, in that we have access to using all of these, and we're frequently testing new products out. Understanding that not everybody has the luxury of having 1, 2, 3 different sizes of spotters that they can choose, and so that for a given hunt, sometimes one in the middle, like the 65, is a great call for a lot of people.
That's
you
where
can kind of split the difference between the big one and the little one that way.
Like I said, do you need a binocular and a spotting scope? Yes. And Paul, I would like to suggest to people that they collect them all. But
we'd love to see that.
Of course. But you're right though. Like to me, like the 65. That's just like that Goldilocks middle ground, kind of best of both worlds. It's a little bit lighter, than the big dog here, the 85 millimeter. I think this is a 22 to 60 by 85, the big one. But again, there's times where this is the choice, and so I know a lot of guys they're like, no, I need that. I'm toting, this 85 mil into the backcountry. I don't care about the size. I don't care about the weight. Like I need what this does.
Yeah, and my hat's off to guys that if you can pack a big spotter like that, there's an advantage to it. I mean, it is going to do a little bit better. That big lens buys you more magnification. It buys you a little more time to use it early in the day, late in the day. So there's a reason for that. But it's bigger. It's more weight. And then guys have to remember too, if you pack a big spotter, you're probably going to have to pack a bigger tripod to stabilize it.
Sure.
So that's another advantage, with a little light tripod or scope like this. Most often you match it with a little lightweight tripod, so you gain twice on that.
Sure.
So.
No. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because certainly a direct correlation there. Or if there's lots of guys that are doing some, high level glassing, but they aren't in the backcountry, right? So why not have something this?
Right. That's a whole different situation. If you're nearby to your truck, your 4-wheel drive, your horse, or maybe you just don't have to hike that far, there's almost no reason not to go with as big a spotter as you can afford. That's true.
So many choices. So many things to consider, but I think it's pretty simple when you boil it down to. It's like so many things. Like, which scope? I was thinking rifle scope. What rifle scope should I get? It's like, what are you going to use it for?
You can kind of focus on a few things like that. Yeah, It's interesting. I look at these little ones, and the zoom range, for example, on this 56, it's 13 to 39, so it's smaller than the big spotter you said there. What's interesting about that scope is it can, at 13 power, it's really very similar to what a higher powered bino is. Typically you and I both use 1250 binos a lot. So at 13 power, this thing can actually be picked up and simply used like a bino. And it's one point, we had that long discussion to begin with about angled or straight. And it's a consideration someone might make on that spotter is that if you go with a straight, you can actually kind of handhold it periodically and use it. It's pretty tough to do that with an angled one. I've tried it.
Okay.
It's just not all that comfortable, but the straight in a little one like that at a lower power, 13 power, it's entirely hand-holdable to look through it. So kind of another little twist on the story there.
That's one heck of a monocular, Paul.
It is. It is indeed. Yeah.
Did we miss anything? People thinking about what they might want to consider when, making a selection?
The only big part of the puzzle we really didn't touch was quality. That's sort of the third leg of that tripod. You have the different size you choose an angled or a straight, and then you have to look at what tier of quality do you want to do. And there's just, as you have these tiers, you get better glass, better assembly quality, better tolerances, better fit and finish. The controls run a little smoother. They become nicer to use. Your image quality goes up as you spend more money there. But again, everyone has a budget. You're kind of fitting what your use is, what your budget is. Someone might not use, as we talked about earlier, you might not use a spotter as much as you use a bino. So to me, I would probably tell people to push your budget on the bino because you're going to use it more, and maybe hedge back a little bit on the spotter because you're going to get less use out of it. But it's just a matter of, again, everybody has a little different criteria that's going to work for them. So.
Well, and, as much as I love to ride Pinky up, and like you said, Paul, we kind of get the pick of the litter around here, so you can edge that way. But in today's world of optics, and we've talked about this before, those mid-tier category, you are getting an incredible amount of performance for your dollar. Yeah. So, and you've watched that. You've been in the optics game forever, right? So it's got to be astounding what you get in kind of like that mid-tier now compared to years past.
What's mid-tier today, really not that many years ago, would have completely been a high-end optic. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
All right. Well, there you have it, everybody. Hopefully this helped you make your spotting scope selection. I know what I'm using at least next week.
Yeah, I do too. I do too. Well, hopefully it didn't, people can kind of get mentally seized up on all this stuff. So hopefully there was enough, someone can pick out some piece of useful info for their particular use there and make it work. So
cool. Very cool. All right. Well, thank you, Paul. It's always fun.
Right.
Thank you everybody for listening. Happy hunting and shooting. Until next time, spotter up. Have a great fall.
Good luck.
Bye.